Alright, today we're going to look over the Blackmagic 12K URSA. Now when you check out an URSA, you should separately get the tripod, the camera case, and a bag with 3 batteries. In the battery bag you get 3 gold mount Anton Bauer batteries that have a status symbol that tell you the percentage of the battery that's left. Those are the 3 things that you get. I'm going to open this case and go through everything that comes in. But you'll notice that as soon as you open the case, everything is very meticulously labeled of what goes where. I'm going to go over all of that, but make sure you pay attention to all the labelings that are inside the case and adhere to that type of organization when you put it back together. The first thing I want to cover is battery charging. So over here you have the battery charger. The cable that charges the battery is hidden back here. You would plug this in, and then you can charge 2 batteries while a 3rd battery is on your camera, meaning at all times your battery should be charging, and then once the camera battery is dead, you swap it out. If you ever need to hardwire the actual camera and plug it into the wall, what you would do is go through the battery charger. You would plug the battery charger into the wall, but then you would plug the camera into the battery charger. Using this second cable here, you would plug that into the front of the charger, and then this cable would plug into the back of the camera, thus giving you forever electricity. Okay, to set up the tripod, you have to take it out of the case, and then there's a few notches here. This knob here locks the tilt, and then this one on the front right here locks the left and right movement. The back of the tripod is always going to be the one with the handle, and you need to know that in order to place the tripod plate. Now this tripod plate is a little more beefy than you're used to coming from FP1 and FP2 for the 6K cameras. The front of it is the triangular base, so you want to always put that on the front. This plate will be found in a separate pouch within the tripod bag, so this will never be mounted on top of here to start with. You have to find it inside the tripod bag in like a specified area. In order to put this on, there's a locking mechanism on top of the tripod. There's an on and an off. To put the plate on, you want to put it towards the off position, and then the plate doesn't slide, the plate kind of plops in. You want to halfway put it on and then push it down while you push this lock all the way to off, and then you push it all the way to on, and now your plate should be in place. This has some freedom to move up and down depending on the weighting and the balance of your camera, but before you put the camera on here, you want to like kind of give this a shimmy to make sure that it's actually on there. I like to make sure I even like lift the tripod with it just to make sure that it's snugly in place. And then to take it off, once again, you just move the switch to the off position and pull the plate off. Okay, so I'd like you to build the camera on the tripod at all times just for optimal safety. If you try to build the camera on your lap, you'll drop it and owe us lots of money. But to put the camera on the tripod, there is a triangle here on the bottom base, and then you're going to fit it in the triangle point here. So basically you put it on a little bit recessed backwards, and then I always like to have a hand behind the camera because you're going to shove the camera forwards and into place. So when it clicks in, you should be good. Then to release it, there is kind of a double release switch here. You have to pull this red tab backwards, and then there's a huge toggle, and always use the top handle. You release the toggle, and then what you want to do is pull the camera backwards towards you, not up, but backwards. So you have double the toggle, and then the camera comes back towards you. So once again, you put the camera in place, there's grooves to guide you, and then these kind of bars fit into those grooves. And then I like to push the camera, and then once again, pull it back. Lots of students try to constantly pull it up, and it doesn't come out. It's a pull backwards towards you before it comes up. Cool. Okay, so we have our camera on the tripod. Let's start building the camera. I'm going to put a lens on. So this is a Canon EF mount, which is kind of all of our lenses right now that we have in the system. We want to make sure when you're putting on a lens, we're prioritizing the safety of the camera sensor, because that is the most expensive, most breakable part of the camera. The back of the lens can get cleaned, so when you put it on, I like to take the lens mount off first and then make sure that I'm covering the hole, or that my first assistant camera is helping me, because if I see your camera just out and about completely naked with its top off and its sensor exposed, I'm going to scream. But once you have your camera on, I want to go ahead and build the rails system and the camera, the shoulder mounting accessories. So the rails for the rail mounting will be in the back of this, kind of loose. You have your rails, but then everything else will be in this far right pocket or pouch. So that will be 2 handles as well as the bracket to mount your handles onto. The rail slots mount into the mounting plate. You just slide those in, and then there are knobs to lock them in place. Now we have our crossbar that our handles are going to mount onto that just slide into place on those rails. That's adjustable to put wherever you want, but it's kind of obvious where they might best go. And then you have these handles that stick onto the left and right sides of those that really kind of tighten into place really well. Once your knobs are in place and twisted down, you can technically put this on your shoulder. If you detach your camera, you'll notice that on the underside here, there's a padded area for you to comfortably rest the camera on your shoulder. So this pad here comfortably rests on the shoulder, and now your handles are in place, and then you have the viewfinder here to look at the image while you operate the camera shoulder mounted. Also in your camera box is your follow focus. This is not the electronic follow focus, but a manual one that comes with the kit. This is going to slide on your rail system as well. Remember that the right side of the camera is always the first AC side, so anything that regards pulling focus goes on the right side. And that'll slide right on your rail, right into place. And then depending on which lens you use, you will just kind of adjust it to where it needs to be. But this just is a locking knob that goes into place, and now we are focusing the camera. And depending whether you're hand holding the camera or not, you may or may not need the actual rails. If all you need is this in place, but you're going to stay on the tripod, you only need to put 1 rail in place. It's up to you. Life is your oyster. Okay, so let's put a battery on the camera. So on the back of the camera, it's pretty self-evident, but there are 3 gold mount kind of buttons on the back of the camera, and there are places where those slot into on the back. You'll put the circles in the holes and make sure it clicks over. Then there's a lock and unlock switch in order to take the battery off. You have to hold that switch down to pull it out. But once you're in, the camera can be powered now. And let's talk about putting the monitor on this camera. You can kind of put the monitor wherever you want. There's any amount of holes to screw the monitor in over here. Also 3 mounting options on top. So in your camera box will also be this padded pouch that houses the camera monitor. This will be a Blackmagic branded monitor. And there's also an articulating arm that you will use to mount that monitor that's in the same place where the handles came from. Now the way you operate this is that everything becomes loose, the ends and the middle joint, just based off this 1 screw. So every part of this will loosen as you loosen the whole apparatus. To screw it in place, I like to make sure that it's tightened and straight before I screw it to wherever I want to put it. So for now, I'm just going to screw it in place right here. And then on the monitor, both the top and the bottom of the monitor have screws for mounting it. So you can kind of dangle the monitor from the top or uphold it from the bottom. Again, whatever you want. So I'm going to screw my monitor in place and then adjust it to where I want it. This is technically a first AC monitor, so I'm going to place it on the side where my first AC can monitor the camera from the right side of the camera. This is really optimizable for you to put it wherever you want to put it. So I have placed it here where if I was the first AC on this side of the camera, I could see the feed while also having access to my follow focus. Okay, so now we have to power the monitor. So in your bag are two of these blue cables. They're called D-tap cables. You should have two of these, and they'll be very clearly labeled where they go. So you'll plug one side into the monitor where it needs to be powered, and the other slot that is kind of like it's got two pins in it. There are two places for you to put it on the camera. So the first place you can put it is actually plugged into the camera. There's a slot here that stays on the camera, or it can plug directly into the battery. Now, if you do plug it into the battery, when you pull the battery and put a fresh one on there, you will have to pull the monitor as well. Personally, I like to plug the monitor straight into the camera so that I can just do a lot less plugging in and unplugging as I go about my day. So I'll plug that in there, and now I have power to the monitor, and the power button is in the top right. You press and hold that, and the monitor will come on. But we have to make sure the camera is now plugged into the monitor so that we are receiving a feed. Okay, so in your camera case, there's a pouch labeled SDI cables. You get 3 cables, but they're slightly different from each other. So 2 of your cables are a normal size SDI to a micro BNC cable. This is kind of specifically only for the monitor. Your 3rd cable is just SDI to SDI. Now this will be used anytime you need to plug into a monitor or a wireless transmitter, or basically anything that takes an SDI cable. You have just one normal SDI cable to use to your heart's desire. The other 2 cables are used almost specifically for this monitor. Okay, so the camera has 2 SDI points. This is called the SDI front. It's kind of specifically maintained for the electronic viewfinder, where you put your eye, the eyepiece. But if for whatever reason you wanted to take that off so that you can have another SDI point, you can. A lot of students don't use the viewfinder at all. They just use the monitor. So if you need that extra port, you have it. But the main port is literally called the main SDI out. It's this top one here. These 2 are kind of unusable for our purposes. It's an SDI in, but if your main SDI port is this back top one here, and that's the one you're going to be using most often. In the menu system, it is literally called main SDI. Okay, so let's plug in the monitor. So I'm going to plug in my SDI cable first on the main SDI port. Make sure that's all the way in there and twist it in place. And then you'll see, again, we're using the micro SDI out or the micro BNC, and we want to go in, so the SDI in to the monitor. Twist that in place, and now your camera is connected to the monitor. Now, I always have questions about hypothetical situations, and we kind of have them set up for you. But let's say you're using all of your ports already. Let's say your camera operator is using the viewfinder, and you have a first AC who's on the camera using this monitor. But let's say we also want to have a wireless transmitter going out of the camera so that everyone else can see the feed as well, so that the director can actually see what's going on also. Well, you can loop it through the monitor. There's another SDI out of the monitor that will also carry the feed. So that's why we have given you 2 of the micro BNC SDI cables. You can actually go out of the monitor and now have an entirely other SDI port that goes into a wireless transmitter. You can also go out of an HDMI out of the monitor into a wireless transmitter. So suddenly you have a viewfinder for the operator, a monitor for the first AC, and a wireless transmitter that goes out to a director's monitor for Video Village. So while you're somewhat limited to 2 SDI ports, you also have a 3rd one if you need to include the monitor in that ecosystem. The camera feed goes into the monitor and out of the monitor as another place to transmit video. If you are interested in wireless transmitters on your set, that is a secondary option that does not come with this camera that you have to check out as an additional item, and there's trainings for that on our channel as well. All right, so when using the monitor, there's a few features. If you pull down, you'll get all of your options available, and in the top right there's the menu to go in and adjust all the menu settings that you want. What's cool about using a Blackmagic monitor is everything looks identical to the same menu system that you've been using. In the top left is kind of all the viewfinder options that we're used to, like false color, frame guides, rule of thirds grid, all of those things. And then to make them go away, you just pull down again. And then also if you double tap, it'll zoom in to help you focus, and then double tap to get out of it. That's really all the functionality you need to know about this. If you want to play with it, everything else is clearly labeled, like you can bring up waveform and vector scopes if you needed to and put them away with some of the other options up here. Okay, so there's an intimidating amount of buttons on the side of this camera. I don't actually use most of these buttons, but I'm going to intimately get into all or most of them. But the most important button is the on switch. It's up here, it's an actual switch. It says on and off. We're gonna turn the camera on. So the other thing, even when you unlock more buttons when you flip the screen open, but I wanna talk about the memory card slots here first. So there are 2 CF card slots and also 2 SD card slots. There's a switch here to change it from CFast or SD. You can't use both, you have to tell it. We provide you CF cards with this camera. I think that's the only time you're actually ever gonna use it. So on the CF card, there's pins on one side, no pins on the other side. It only goes in one way. Obviously, throw the pins in there. If it feels like it's resisting you and not going in, it only goes in one way, so just flip it around. It should go easily in, and then it kind of clicks into place. And there's an ejecto button down here to eject it. You press that button in, and the CF card will pop out. So for whatever reason you don't want to use our memory cards and you want to record straight onto your hard drive, there's a USB-C slot on the back where you can plug your hard drive straight into it. So if you have a 4 terabyte hard drive and you want to record straight to it rather than going off of a card and then transferring the footage later, you can by using that USB-C slot. But we're going off of our card, and I'm going to show you the memory card system here. If you ever use the 6K, it's the same system. So once your card is in place, it will show up on the bottom. There's 2 card slots. Yours will light up blue once it's connected. You can just click on that and it'll give you all the information on the card. The first thing you should do when you're about to shoot something is format your card, which means erasing all of it so that you have a full, fresh card to work off of. So to erase it, if you have 2 cards in, you'll have to pick your slot, and then there's a Format CFast card button. We always want to choose exFAT. We want to format to the exFAT format because that means you can use it on both Windows and Apple computers. You want to click the Format CFast button again, and then Format CFast button again, and then you hold the Format CFast button for 3 seconds. It makes sure unequivocally that you are going to format it before you format it, because now all the footage that was on this card is now gone forever, and it'll tell you how much time you have to record based on your current settings for the camera. You exit, and now you're ready to go. Okay, so this monitor is just like every other Blackmagic monitor, so it's just like the 6K menu system, it's just like the monitor menu system. You can slide down to make all the settings go away, or slide back up to make them come back. All of your shutter speed, shutter angle, ISO, white balance, everything can be done with like a touch screen, but there are also buttons on the side of the camera if you need to use physical buttons for them. So on the side over here, we'll put that apart. These 3 toggles right here, there's one for ISO, there's one for shutter, there's one for white balance, and this just toggles up and down. And you'll see in the system when you toggle the ISO up 1, it'll go up 1 increment level. So it'll go from ISO 200 to 400 to however the normal increments go. So if this camera's on your shoulder and you're using the viewfinder and you can't really use the touchscreen, you can just put your fingers up here and toggle whatever you want to toggle. So these are clearly labeled ISO, shutter, white balance. You normally wouldn't really use the toggles for shutter and white balance. I mainly just use the ISO button. But you also have your function 1, function 2, and then high frame rate buttons. So whatever you program in the camera for function 1, which is usually like focus peaking or false color, those you can change within the menu system to toggle those on and off using the function buttons. And then the high frame rate button will change your frame rate to a secondary frame rate that you program as well. No one ever really uses this button. Normally the cameras stay at 24 frames a second, depending on the project. On the back of the monitor, there are all these buttons, but most of them are reserved for time code stuff, which is normally something that we don't operate with. You can get into time code stuff if you take the audio class, but for now, I really ignore all these buttons on the back of this almost entirely. There's a record button here. It's bright red. When you press record, the light turns red. So when everything's ready and you need to record, press the record button. There is one other record button on the inside, so if the monitor is closed, you would use this one, but if it's open, you have the options of that outer one or this inner one to use. The last thing that's on here is this knob that I want to look out. This is our ND filter. So once again, that's a neutral density filter that it's kind of like sunglasses for your camera. It makes your camera darker, and you can just turn it as much as you want. There's a clear setting, then a 2 stops of ND, then 4, then 6. I'll show you the monitor to show you how that operates. But basically, slightly darker for every level of ND that you put on, and then all the way back to clear. It's internal. Those used to be filters that you'd put in front of the lens, but now they go in front of the sensor and you just turn a knob. They're magical. So if your image is too bright, like you're shooting under the harsh sun, make sure that you are aware of using ND filters. Also, when you turn the camera on, the person before you may have been using the ND filter and you need to go completely clear it out. So make sure. A lot of students will say, hey, this camera's too dark, my images are too dark, and it's just because the ND filter is cranked to 100. So make sure you're cognizant of that when operating this camera. Okay, so audio-wise on the top of the camera, there are 2 XLR inputs to plug in if you want to plug in directly to the camera. This isn't normally something that we would do. It's more for documentary type production, but there are 2 XLR plugs if you need them. Then on the menu in the bottom right of the menu screen, you will see your audio levels bounce as it receives audio. There is the fuzzy side of a Velcro strip that we've placed here specifically for timecode transmitter, but also anything that you have that can be Velcroed. This is kind of a designated spot for it. Instead of just having stuff flopping around or dangling, you can Velcro it in place here. Okay, let's get into the menu system because there's a lot of stuff within the brains of this beast that we have to look at. So this camera shoots 12K. We will never use 12K. Our memory cards can't capture more than about 5 seconds of 12K, and none of our computers display 12K. The only monitor in the world that actually displays anything this high is the Sphere Theater in Vegas, that circular dome place. We don't need 12K. You can shoot 8K, 6K, or 4K. But I would actually only shoot 8 or 4, and I'll tell you why. So with 8K, you can shoot different aspect ratios you can record. The actual native aspect ratio isn't 16:9, it's actually 17:9. It gives you a little bit more leeway to the left and right to adjust your image in post. I would always shoot that because it's giving you the most data. You could shoot, CinemaScope if you want your final image to be that wider aspect ratio. But I would actually always gather as much image as I can and then crop it in post. But if you attempted to shoot 6K, it crops your sensor in, so you're actually not using the whole sensor. It makes everything worse, basically. So if you're using a 35mm lens, it'll actually crop that into somewhere closer to 50mm. I would never use 6K on this camera because it's not using the whole sensor, which runs you into all kinds of problems. I think you should always really just use 4K. You're never going to need 8K worth of data, and it's going to slow your whole post-production process down. 4K for this camera is gorgeous and beautiful and all you will ever really need. And then again, you have all of your aspect ratio choices here. I would always shoot the 17:9. Now you also have your bitrate options. I would always use 8:1 or 12:1. Basically, when you have a larger ratio, you're going to get less data and therefore less stuff on your memory card. And then 5:1 is the other part of this, where your data is going to be a lot larger and you're going to have more to work with, but it's going to fill up your memory card a lot faster. I always recommend either 8:1 or 12:1. Personally, I like to use 8:1, but those options are for you. All right, moving on. Within the record menu, when you go to the right, you have all these other options. We keep all of our cameras on extended video, but then you can also change your frame rate here. You can change which card you want to record to if you have more than one in. We always record at 24 frames a second in extended video, but the first time you change the camera or turn the camera on, you need to go and check these settings, because maybe the person before you shot at 60 frames a second for something completely different. You need to make sure that you have that dialed in before you start on your set. The last menu of the record setting is time-lapse stuff. I simply would never go in here. Now the monitor submenu, this is where you control all the settings for all of your monitors. Now we have a lot of settings here in a lot of places. So the LCD settings are just for this monitor here. The front SDI settings are for everything that's coming out of your front SDI port. The main SDI settings are for everything that's coming out of this main SDI port in the back of the camera, or you can control all of them by using the All tab, and then everything will come out with these settings. So you can kind of individualize what you want for maybe the first AC or coming out of the viewfinder, or something different even coming out of just the LCD. The world is your oyster again. You can control everything you want, but all of these options are also just the main settings that come out of in the top left on all the Blackmagic monitors. So your frame guides and all that stuff, you can also simply get into it just in these settings. So you can have your LUT, your zebra, your grid, your frame guides, all this stuff kind of can go on and off in this menu system as well. But if you want to quickly apply settings to all of your feeds, you come to the monitor tab, the All tab, and now you have options that'll go through every port from your entire camera. Now, one very important thing that I need to talk about that kind of cripples some production sometimes is in the main SDI menu. Not in the first tab, but in the second tab, there's an option to output at a 4K feed from 1080p to 2160p. If you do that, nothing's going to work. None of our monitors, none of our wireless transmitters, none of that can handle 4K. You want to always make sure this is at 1080p. If you put it at 4K, basically your main SDI port will no longer work. We've had so many students come in and say that, hey, the SDI port's broken, it's broken, nothing's working, it's broken, and it ruined our whole shoot, we hate you. And all that really happened is that someone had gone in and changed this to 4K, basically because they think it's a bigger number and it's better. No, always keep this at 1080p or nothing will work. You need to make sure whoever's operating the camera, the cinematographer, the camera operator, one of the main first things they need to do is go into this SDI tab, main SDI, and make sure this is at 1080p so that the camera SDI port will actually work. All right, now our third tab is the audio tab. This needs to always be on camera left and camera right. Now, if you plug something into the camera and you do want to get the audio from that XLR, you have to go and change it to XLR. But sometimes people will use this camera and use the XLR and then leave it on there. And then the next person who comes to use the camera does not change it back. And suddenly you have no camera audio. Now, camera audio for us is important because it's what we sync the audio with. We want to sync the recording, the audio recording device's audio with the camera audio. But if you don't have this on left and right, then suddenly you don't have source audio to sync with. So it is very important before you start recording that you come back in here and check that you have camera audio coming in through the left and the right channels. I would always kind of have this at 50% as a baseline, and then make sure it's on camera left and camera right, not necessarily camera mono. In your setup tab, this kind of sets up a few of the more meticulous details of the camera, but for a large portion of operating this camera, you don't need to go in here. But something that does need to get changed is whether you're going to operate with shutter angle or shutter speed. Shutter angle is normally always going to be at 180, but shutter speed you can manipulate if you're going to use different frame rates and stuff like that. as a rule of thumb, we are usually always on shutter angle and at 180 degrees. You can display your battery as a percentage or as a voltage. That should always really be at percentage. You can change the way the ND filter is displayed, and then there's a couple other kind of more meticulous options here that we just would never change. Now in the fourth menu is where you can change what your buttons do. So I like to always have control of what my buttons do. So basically my F1 button, I like to be false color, and then my F2 button, I like to be focus assist. That's normally what it is, but sometimes that can be changed. Sometimes students like to put a LUT or the zebra or frame guides on here in order to completely turn it off and on using the toggle buttons. Again, use whatever you want. I like my F1 button to be false color and F2 to be focus peaking, but you can change these buttons to literally be whatever your heart desires to help you operate the camera better. There's a few more menus within the setup tab that I would never go into that are just really things that aren't going to change the way the camera operates. There's a presets tab. Our presets tab is normally completely empty, but if you want to program all your exact settings to be repeatable, you can dial in the camera exactly how you want it, create a preset, and then next time you use this camera, you can load up your preset. But no one ever does that. Our presets tab is most commonly completely empty, and you won't have to worry about it. And the last thing is our LUT tab. So that's kind of a bit of a reference, almost Instagram filter type thing. If you don't know what a LUT is, if you turn your LUT on, it'll kind of show you a very blank slate sample color grade to the footage. And our cameras are built in with 3 LUT options. Because we usually use extended video, I like to keep the LUT as the Gen 5 film to extended video LUT. But if you are really knowing exactly what your color grade is going to be, you can actually apply your color grade into the camera and then put your LUT onto your footage if you really want to control your image that much. Now this is never going to bake into your footage, so it's just a reference thing. If you never want to use a LUT, you don't ever have to use it. Okay, so make sure you never just completely yank the battery off while the camera is in operation. You always want to use the switch to power off the camera and then start taking it apart. We have had quite a few of these cameras break, and basically they brick and they stop working and there's no way to repair them. Blackmagic tells us the leading cause of that is when people just pull the battery without turning the camera off. So make sure you turn the camera off before you just yank the battery out, because that will kill the camera. And the accessories, the same thing goes with the monitor. You want to turn the monitor off using the power button instead of just yanking its power cable. Turn it off before you just yank the power, because it'll break and then you owe us money. Don't owe us money. Hashtag don't owe us money. There are a few things on the exterior of the camera that I want to point out before we go home. Within our cheese plate on the side, there's a cold shoe mount. Many of our accessories that don't come in this kit but come exterior as other items can simply slot into the cold shoe mounting of this cheese plate. You should know where that is. And then also, if you are using a time code, if you are in the audio class or you're using the time code, your time code slot is the 1/2/3 port at the back of the camera. And then this is where you would plug the camera in if you need to hardwire the camera and plug it into the wall. It is this 12 volt in 4-pin slot. Okay, so once you've built out your camera and you have all these accessories and all these heavy items hanging and dangling off your camera, you kind of need to make sure that the tripod is balanced so that it's not completely going forwards or backwards. And there's multiple ways that you can balance it. So the best way to kind of know if it's balanced or not is just by letting the tilt lock go, disengaging the tilt lock, and then letting it go. And I can kind of see that this is tilting backwards a bit. So you can use these knobs to change the balance and how much resistance is in both the tilt and the pan. But most of your balancing is going to come from simply sliding the camera forwards or backwards using the tripod. So if I know that it's tilting backwards a little bit, I just want to slide it forwards to compensate, and then make sure it's locked into place. And then I'll disengage the tilt again, and I'll kind of just feel to see if it feels balanced. To me, this feels pretty good, but oftentimes cameras will come in and this knob will be cranked to infinity as a way to balance it. Remember, your first option to balance it is always sliding it forwards or backwards. And you can't really balance it until the camera's completely built, because it's going to weigh much different with all of its stuff on it. Now, if you do use the eyepiece in the viewfinder, there are 3 buttons here that are kind of labeled with their normal settings. One says zoom, display, and peak, but they're actually function as a F1, F2, F3, so function buttons. They have their own options within the menu system, and you can change all of what these buttons do. So false color, focus peaking, everything like that. This has its own display settings, just like every monitor has. Now, this also is an optical viewfinder, so you have to focus it according to your eye as well. So if it ever looks like this is out of focus while the monitor looks like it's in focus, that's because you have to actually focus the eyepiece as well. Now, where the eyepiece is adjustable as well. There's 2 knobs underneath. This knob will lock in the tilt. This second knob will actually allow it to come out left or right, depending on where you want your face to be. And then you can also, there's another knob here, where if you loosen this, it'll actually go forwards and backwards. And that really is just adjusting where you can put your face if you're operating the camera on your shoulder. Just make sure you retighten it when you are done.
Hey gang, I'm gonna pop in here. When you are breaking down and you've got the camera off and you are packing it away like Casey's about to show you, a thing to remember when you are putting the tripod back is to leave your tilt and your pan locks unlocked, right? So when you're about to put it in the bag, it needs to be able to flex everywhere. You also want to make sure your pan bar lock is unlocked. I like to tighten it up just a little bit so it's not flopping around crazy, but I'm not going to lock it down super tight, because the reason I don't lock the pan bar down super tight, these teeth in here will start to grind if that is too loose. And also if it's locked down super, super tight, that can take a bump and chip one of those teeth in there. But the reason you want to leave your tilt and your pan unlocked is because when this is in the bag, this is able to flex. There are springs in here on both sides. So I see a lot of students making it fit in the bag like that, and then it's locked down. You don't want to do that, because the springs in here will start to wear off and they can snap if they're locked down like that, and then they take a bump in the bag. And this is for every tripod. It doesn't matter if it's one of these super expensive ones like we use on the URSAs, or an $11 one that you got from a big box store for your DSLR. You always want to leave these unlocked so that it doesn't put unnecessary tension on the springs.
Okay, now everything should be clearly labeled, but I want to make sure that you see where everything goes in this box. So the camera flops down in there. Make sure everything's off the camera. The battery's off, the lens is off, the camera is completely naked going into the box. Again, your memory stuff is down here, your card reader, your cords, your CF cards go in these slots. There's extra slots up here, but they stay empty. In this left chamber is going to be your follow focus, your padded pouch for the monitor, as well as the battery charger. But the cables for the battery charger go in the lid slot in the back. The cables will go in here, as well as the rails, and that velcros back into place closed. You have 2 D-tap cables that go in this. This stays empty. And then in the bottom slot, you have your 3 SDI cables, and then this slot stays empty as well. In your right pouch over here, your 2 handles and your crossbar that the handles go to, as well as the articulating arm that will mount the monitor in place. Once everything's put away, it should very easily close and snap shut, and you're ready to go. Good luck on your shoot.